Hi, everybody. How are you today? This is Tracy Stuckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events and Eating at a Meeting. And this is a weekly podcast that is live on Facebook, and it will be actually produced and put onto the podcast platforms starting August 1st. So I'm very excited about that. In today's guest is Eric Wallinger from Meet Green. He's the Director of Sustainability, and he focuses on resources and the environment, allows him to work closely with destination suppliers and planner teams from around the world to integrate sustainable practices into their events and organizations. In 2019 alone, he and his colleagues at Meet Green helped support the donation of more than 290,000 pounds of food and the composting of more than 181,000 pounds of food scraps through their events. Holy crap, Eric, that's a lot of food.
I want to, hi everybody. Hearing that you say that number, I wanted to kind of also clarify that a chunk of that was actually a food and beverage minimum that was converted to purchasing food. So this was not all wasted food.
Wow, okay.
So that really boosted that number. Our number next year, if that doesn't happen,
right,
will be lower. Typically for those big shows, it's anywhere from 800 to 2,000 and 3,000 pounds for a big, trade show style that you sort of see as food waste.
So, okay, so let's go back to that one thing that you were clarifying. So 290,000 pounds of food. And that was because the food that was made to meet the food and beverage minimum that planners have to pay unless to get free meeting space. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so how can we combat that?
Well, things change so much in our events, as we know as planners. And the things, it seems like at the bigger shows where you've got multiple venues, there is, this group of people isn't meeting over there, and you have kind of committed to spending X, Y, and Z, and typically that just gets reabsorbed by the venue as like a penalty. And so making that case that could be converted to food donation, and especially now in sort of a post-COVID world, that might be even an easier sell, at least in terms of safety. Who could argue with just sort of buying sealed food? But also these venues, may be motivated more to kind of uphold, sort of extract every dollar. Who knows? But that opportunity is available. And I think 2020, 2021 would be great opportunities for us all to see if we can sell them on that idea.
Yeah, I think COVID has actually, with seeing the news stories of farmers retailing their crops into their land, and our convention centers donating, and I know MGM was really big at donating what they had in the refrigerators and the freezers to food banks. Hopefully that helps eliminate that, oh, well, we can't do that because we don't want the liability statement of donation.
Yeah, I am curious to see. We haven't seen that as being the primary concern, sort of still, if it hasn't sort of left the back of house piece. And we haven't seen a lot of event evidence right now. We're still in that very closed summer of 2020 period. So we're guessing a little bit, but we know that demand on food banks has gone up by about 40% nationally. And we also know that typically they have been fed by, our sports arenas, our hotels, our restaurants, sometimes from our local homes and so forth. But it's really that commercial event sector that has been a huge piece of that supply chain of food.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of the stuff that when COVID first hit, it was really startling to me, all of that stuff that was going to waste. And I'm like, we've got these big kitchens, we've got these large facilities, and the staff, in an essence, before they were all like furloughed, to make food, to serve to these food banks and provide to these food banks so that people weren't going hungry. And I know that a lot of our partners have come into that realm of donation. So it's really exciting to see, but there's so much more that we can do, but it doesn't we don't realize, I don't think people realize that a lot of that's donations from the food banks does come from our industry. And I don't think our industry even knows that.
I agree. I agree that this will be a real, as with a lot of things related to food safety and sustainability, it's going to be kind of a real re-education happening and needed in the next couple of years.
So I've given a couple of webinars over the last 6 weeks, and the topics have come in under, the questions have come under topics of, how do I manage dietary restrictions? Of what are your biggest concerns and what are your biggest, what do you want to know about? So it's dietary restrictions. How can we be sustainable, in light of COVID, and food safety, and then just food safety in general. So can they mesh? Can food safety and food sustainability work hand in hand?
I believe they can.
Yeah.
I believe, and I believe Meat Green models this as well, that it kind of has always been the case in sustainability that, the first Earth Day in 1970, there was a big kind of safety piece of that our planet would be habitable to present times. Just in January of this year, Larry Fink of BlackRock Capital sent a letter to investors that sustainability was now going to be considered a key risk assessment piece. So every BlackRock kind of portfolio addition would go through a rigorous sustainability vetting as well. And that's the first there. And so it's linked with risk management. When you look at the World Economic Forum, this is just January of this year as well, projecting out over the top 10 risks of the next decade, 5 of those falling into environmental, so 50%.
Wow.
So, this isn't just people passionate about sustainability off in the corner trying to prove this. This is coming very much from our investment side. This is coming from sort of our global thought leaders. But in terms of how that can look, we're often seeing the more sustainable choice, just sort of eliminating extra touches, extra things, the production of extra things. So there's that. I can give some more examples. So, like in terms of plastic bottles, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of sealed water bottles and so forth. But many of the water filling stations that we're seeing at venues are relatively touchless. You put something in, you don't even have to push a button, then it comes down. If we all brought our own bottle and we all sort of sanitized our hands, we believe that that stands a chance that could be equally as safe. Seems like the messages that we're getting from CDC data at present is that the primary vector of COVID transmission is sort of person to person, relating to respiratory droplets over sustained contact, or over a sustained period of time. Surface transmission, while there is evidence, and I'm not an expert, but what I'm reading is that it's sort of a secondary and sort of a less pressing sort of vector of transmission. So I think it's going to be a hard sell for us all to kind of walk in and tell these venues, like kind of argue right from the get-go. But I think having this in the wings, like once we get our sea legs under us, once we see events happening, we see them going off really well, that we can really make that case for there's areas like water bottles, areas like packaging. We may not need everything hermetically wrapped. We were talking about this earlier when we were just sort of warming up for this, but if you follow a plate coming out of a dishwasher that's been washed at temperature with various chemicals and considered sort of sanitary, that's touched once coming out, put on a rack. If it's sort of going to be given back to you again with food on it, that will be touched a total of 2 times. And if you're being given a box of pre-wrapped things, that will be touched 1 time. And so when you take that into the context of that you've flown there, staying in a hotel, probably ridden public transportation and met with a bunch of other people, it puts that in perspective. And again, I'm fully anticipating cautious to the nines, and we probably won't be able to argue that down on event number 1. But if we're all prepared to sort of make our cases after we've gotten a next level of data back, I think we can kind of walk back some of the less sustainable pieces.
Yeah, and I think the water jug thing, and when I first, actually my airport here in New Bern, North Carolina, I posted, this was a couple of months ago, they had just gotten that touchless water thing. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so excited for this, because I was having to buy a bottle of water because it was the old fashioned water fountain, which you can barely get any water into your water bottle from. So they switched it out. And a friend of mine's like, well, you need to wipe that down before you use it because of all of the germs. And I'm like, okay. That kind of went over my head. I was like, really? But I think that the water bottles that we see in banquet rooms where you have to actually touch the lever, and how can, hotels, instead of just putting them at the bathrooms, those touchless things, can they put those in each of the ballrooms? I mean, you can't do it on an air wall, but you could potentially do it. If you have it on the outside wall, why can't you put one on the inside wall of a hard wall?
I agree. And this would be, a great driver of certain retrofits.
Yeah.
We're also are seeing in smaller events, and we're not seeing many events right now, but the smaller things that we're seeing, we have seen examples of sort of a dedicated water server.
Yep.
For those events that are
water barista.
Yeah, a water barista. And so it's kind of coming from that central point.
Yeah, and having that person serve and it's a water bar or water whatever, so you could potentially have really a lot of fun with that. And I like the idea, though, of not having pre-poured water and iced tea on every single buffet, on every single table. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another example of where something that would have been the most sustainable in any environment 5 years ago or today is also sort of the more sustainable and safe option now.
Yeah. And you guys have a checklist, right, on the website?
We do, on meetgreen.com.
Uh-huh.
And what we did is Meet Green, for every event that it works on, whether it's a sustainability consulting event or event planning, we apply a total of 16 minimum sort of initiatives. Many of them can be sort of small in some eyes, but requesting the donation of food.
Right.
It's not rocket scientist, but that's something that we request and kind of push for every event. So we had 16 of those. And one of the ways that we tried to manage our own internal expectations of what might happen is we took those and looked at how they would track in our anticipation of a COVID reopened world.
Okay.
And we found, of those 16, we could make the case that 14 of those 16 could proceed ahead.
Wow.
2 of them would fall into kind of a yellow use caution. One of those yellow use cautions was around condiments. We believe that there are ways to kind of continue to use bulk condiments, especially sort of in light of the idea that you have now gone to an event and sort of entered the world, as it were, and sort of sanitizing your hand before entering a food court, having your temperature checked and all that kind of thing, would kind of put you in a place where that's why it kind of puts it in. It's possible. It's probably not going to happen right away, and we're happy to sort of, not push too hard there. But what I want to kind of follow this up with is, we're leaning in here, and I have my own biases of being in the events industry, loving the events industry, and looking for every reason for it to be the most sustainable it can. But we're also trying to balance that with the way that the CDC tends to communicate key transmission and risk. But we found a couple weeks after we published this that I have a copy of it here with me.
I posted the link online, but show us. Yeah.
The 119 health experts from across the globe, from 18 countries, actually signed a statement basically supporting the use of reusables at events.
Oh.
And it's really neat when you look at the end of who the signatures are. I mean, some of it's from all over America, so it's not sort of like the University of Environmentalists. You know,
Right.
it's really a cross section of a lot of different states with some institutions also that you know, are pretty prestigious and so forth. But let's see. I don't know if I'm prepared to really quote a ton, but so basically, that one of the take homes is sort of based upon best available science and guidance from public health professionals. It's clear reusable systems can be used safely by employing basic hygiene. So it's kind of back to what we talked about, but it's something, if we want to post it as a resource after this event, where he can do that as well. And again, I fully expect you know, it to be the venue sort of coming back as comfortably as they can. They have to manage their liability, manage the risk. But I'm fully prepared to kind of document this process as events reopen, looking at where are those areas that we can make some headway, and kind of in the next event cycle, seeing how comfortable everyone is, seeing where the science has fallen. Right. You know, a year from now, 6 months from now, and continuing to make that case as we always have. Right.
Now, my head went back to plastics.
Yeah.
So let's talk plexiglass. You know, I posted a picture the other day of my YMCA, and they hung plexiglass screens basically along the registration desk, and, you know, putting those up at buffets, and I, you know, was talking to Exhibit House. I'm like, have fun with them. You know, if you're going to put the plexiglass up, you know, use writable markers on there, and so that you can announce the dietary needs of the food that you're being served, or that server can write their name, or, you know, have fun with it. But that plexiglass, I'm assuming those are all going to be reusable, right? And have you seen venues or heard of venues buying that to install that into buffets? Or
I am going to be very excited when I see my first buffet coming back. I really feel like that's going to be the slowest. I feel like it's going to.
But action stations with servers, you know.
Yeah. Yep.
And having that barrier there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we see that sort of at everything from our local Starbucks to you know, our grocery stores now.
Yeah.
That those will be very reusable, but we are seeing a tremendous increase in plastic. I mean, anyone on this call can Google this right now. There's still not a great number out there for how much has it increased, but the LA Times published an article maybe 2 weeks ago, and Thailand had come out with a study, and I believe that they have seen a 30% rise, or projecting a 30% rise in plastic overall increase in Thailand in this year. So normally we'd see sort of a 1 to 2% fluctuation one way or another, but 30%. But from April 2020 to April 2019, April 2020 was up 62%. And so that's a data point that we got from Thailand. And I believe the World Economic Forum also published that they're predicting plastic production to increase by 1/3 over the next 5 years. That's a lot.
Oh my God.
And here's the crazy part, and triple by 2050. So that's the World Economic Forum. That's scary. For those of us who are thinking about sustainability, it's a real head spinner. I mean, we were kind of going along quite well, and it is a setback. Right.
So I was going to try to put up, I don't know how I've never done this before. So I was going to share a screen to show this picture layout. All right. I'm going to share my screen to your checklist real quick. I'm going to try this. If this works. Sustainability. There. Can you see that?
I do not see your screen.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I don't know how to do this. We'll hit cancel. Okay. We won't do that. We'll go back over here. Because I was going to share your checklist on what that was, because when we're thinking about, you know, getting rid of the plastics, and you and I were talking about silverware, and you were talking about reusable. So if you can clarify for planners, rolled silverware to be washed versus reusable silverware. So to me, rolled silverware is reusable, right?
Yeah.
So talk about the difference between that and the reusable that you're mentioning.
One thing about the checklist piece, if you go to meetgreen.com, probably the quickest way is blog. You can click that, and it's listed there too. And it's safety and sustainability is the one.
I put the link in one of the Facebook groups, so
cool.
Make sure. Yeah.
Well, we're likely to see a single-use disposables sort of increase. Is what we're anticipating. One of the things people don't always think about in this, and one of the things that this paper from the scientists highlighted, is the downstream impact.
Okay.
When you sort of throw something out, that has implications as well of transmission and sort of kind of COVID pollution, COVID spreading as well. So, there are not many silver bullets in sustainability. There's always a trade-off somewhere. We were talking about this before this call, that things like aluminum, where it's infinitely recyclable and easy to extract in a waste system, also has one of the highest carbon footprints. And so depending what your sustainability priorities are will drive how much you want to use aluminum. And that way plastic would be the smarter choice if carbon was your sole metric.
Okay.
Anyway, there's all kinds of trade-offs up and down the line. And the one thing that we feel the most comfortable about is reusables, is the kind of best practice silver bullet, likely to receive a little bit of resistance up front with these events. But we talked about, we believe that we can make the case after a little bit more data is in, that it will be safe. There will be sort of a minimum of extra touches, but we're finding that many of these pieces, such as porcelain plates and cups and silverware, are used thousands of times. I mean, we don't have the magic number, but from a little bit of light venue surveys that we've done, it's in the thousands of times with very minimal breakage. Breakage is not a substantial issue at these venues. And they are more resource intensive to create on the upstream side.
Which one? The porcelain or the
porcelain. So when you're making sort of a physical, sort of like durable, multi-use object, that does use quite a bit more resources, energy, carbon to produce. But when you hit a break-even point, after about 40 uses, which is easily done at most restaurants and venues, that is a slam dunk. You've kind of ridden off into the sunset in terms of the most sustainable option. Plastic is popular because it's cheap to make. And you will see people who make the case that styrofoam cups have a lower footprint, but that's not telling the whole story.
And that, I think that's one of the hard things too, is telling that whole story, because I think you have a give and take with anything that you choose, right? In any decision that you make in life. But in sustainability, you have to, I think it was Mariella that says, let's look at maybe this one thing. You can reduce your paper at your event, right? How much paper you use at your event. But so you're going to save money on that and save on sustainability to offset maybe something else that you have done, right? And you can think of that as actually flying carbon offsets, right? I'm flying to this event and I'm going to pay for some carbon offsets. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the field of kind of carbon calculation, especially for events, tends to be around combustion. Like when you look at your carbon footprint. But what we're trying to do at Meet Green is make the case for the clients that we're working on that highlighting carbon savings across the board. And one of those areas might be, back to kind of diet, when you were talking about sort of menu and diet sustainability, proteins. Many of us need protein, but also might have a restriction around the kind of protein that we get or would choose. And if you are able to reduce the amount of red meat in your diet, you are really able to have tremendous environmental benefits in terms of water savings, energy savings, carbon savings. And whenever we run a number like that for an event at any kind of scale, the numbers are just wild. It's
Really?
a lot more than you would think. So just know that that's on the table for you. And although you're not getting the credit you should in your carbon footprint, because we're finding that these material choices, food choices, lots of different choices are saving carbon. Our ability kind of as a industry, it's not just the events industry, but just sort of the sustainability industry is not sort of taking those into account quite in the same way. So we're making the case in reports and so forth, but the model is not really there yet to kind of fully tease that out, would be my opinion.
Okay. And, before we got on, I was, talking about, the food and Heather Herrick's on here. So hi, Heather and Julie and Jeannie and who else is on here? Lori and Adrian and Susanna. Thanks for being here. Heather and I had a conversation a couple of months ago when we watched all of the food being tilled back into the farmland because the farmers had no place to take it. And, there's 2 college kids started a company called the FarmLink Project, and they're going and picking up, they called farmers and rented a truck and went and picked up that food and delivered it to a food bank. And they figured it, Heather and I are like, okay, so what do we do? And I'm like, okay, I'm not 20 years old, apparently. But they figured it out. But I think, too, is that so it's the sourcing, I'm getting to my point of sourcing locally. And in some of my webinars, I was talking about apples. And, an apple falls from the tree, and that farm worker touches it and puts it in a truck, and that truck goes somewhere else. And then it go to the grocery store or to the food, to Cisco or US Foods, and then it goes all these other places. But we can reduce it and be more sustainable by sourcing that apple locally, or not necessarily the apple, but sourcing more things locally that are in season. And can you talk about that a little bit? It's going to raise our prices, right? Because it is more organic, or will it?
It doesn't have to impact pricing, but it's another example, and it's actually on our Meet Green Safe and Sustainable list of where sort of the more sustainable choice and under any environment is also the safest one in a COVID environment. Okay. As you mentioned, it's just sort of less handling, less possible places. You're sort of more in touch with your region, presumably, than whatever is happening globally. But we've seen statistics that by keeping your spend within the region, and typically we define a region as 250 miles.
Okay.
Although you could, in areas like Las Vegas, we'll extend that out to a 500-mile region because the growing region is sort of limited in that part of the country. But your spend is actually magnified 3 times, keeping your money locally.
Really? Wow. Yeah. That's awesome.
So you're doing social good. You're having social impact. You're also, so you could be supporting businesses, minority-owned businesses, small businesses, all businesses of all kinds. So you're putting your dollars to work that could have social impacts as well. You're magnifying your spend. You're eliminating touches, and you could be eating more seasonally as well, which would have sort of, instead of growing something, you might be reducing the amount of water, for instance, that is needed to produce an apple if it's in season.
Yeah. So I could ask you, so what are 1 or 2 resources that you could share with everybody here on how to be more sustainable and safe? I've already posted the link to your Safety and Sustainability in 2020 link, and I'll make sure that it's in the Eating in the Meeting Facebook page as well, or group as well. But anything else?
Yeah, I think we should. I'll circle back to you with a link about the physicians.
Okay.
Because it's sort of like helps credential it a step further than just the sustainability team or those passionate about sustainability. Certainly in this case, kind of you have some medical establishment there too. But outside of safety a little bit, but just sort of what might be interesting to your listeners, there's a part of Meet Green's site. If you type in My Event Footprint,
Okay.
It's an impact
You sent me that
calculator.
link, right? I'm going to put that in there. Okay.
I think this is fascinating for communicating. I think it's a really big part of what your work does, Tracy, which is communicate, help educate people.
Mhm.
And I think it's what we're all going to be having to do more of coming up is education,
Yeah.
and telling that story. But you can play with it a little bit. Number of days for your event, number of people. Don't use commas because that sort of breaks it a little bit. So
Okay.
tinker with that and tinker with going through once and answering yes or no through the questions, and then tinkering answering no to all the questions and yes to just a couple that you're interested in, like eliminating water bottles or that kind of thing. And it gives you a readout of your carbon, energy, and water.
Okay.
It's part of that sustainable storytelling, choosing chicken over beef, that sort of things.
Right.
And, you can do that if you have a 1,000-person meal and everyone serves chicken over beef. So it's part of, it can assist your storytelling. And the last resource, I'd recommend visiting the ReFed site.
Okay.
Just landing on their main page, it's just a sea of data. So if you're looking for data to support kind of reducing food waste, trends in the industry, and one of the top best practices they list on that site, again, is education to combat all this.
Right.
I recommend paying a visit to their site as well for someone who's taking it to a really great level.
Okay, cool. And I actually, I'm going to be interviewing somebody from ReFed next month. So
Amazing.
I'm a meeting planner. So I'm excited to chat with them. Any last minute thoughts on how we can do this and encouragement to planners, and how can they find Meet Green?
Well, Meet Green is the easy part. Just if you type anything like sustainable events into the internet, will come up, meetgreen.com. But yeah, we would love to help you in your storytelling, your work, your coming back, or your event planning. But just in terms of the industry, I think just supporting each other. This is not the year any of us expected. No. And trying to do our best to, help our fellow planners, help people at the venue, keep our enthusiasm up. Mm-hmm. And try and educate ourselves around ways that our industry can convene virtually or physically.
I think we definitely need to encourage everybody amongst ourselves on how to do this and to bring meetings back safely. And it's important. And I said to you earlier, and in my webinars, food safety has always been there. It's just been behind the kitchen door. And we need to knock that kitchen door down and talk to our food and beverage partners about this. But the same thing with sustainability. Sustainability necessarily hasn't been there all the time, but companies have probably been doing it and they haven't been communicating what they're doing. So I think combining that conversation and communicating it out to our attendees is super important, as well as to our planners.
Completely agree. And one of the best practices that links with what you're saying is a back of house tour. Making sure that when these events come back, that your lead event stakeholders are allowing 15, 20 minutes to walk with your director of food and beverage, your event manager, and so that you can help assure your stakeholders that it's been verified.
Yeah. And actually, one more question I have. A lot of planners get the pushback, and hopefully this is going to change because of COVID, that, hey, we can't donate because we don't want the liability and, we don't want that. What recommendations do you have for planners to get around that?
Well, we always kind of point people back to the Bill Emerson Act. So this was a law, kind of a Good Samaritan law that came out during the Clinton era. And there has never been one case filed against this. So this is...
Really?
Yeah. So it's not like there's just a sea of lawsuit precedents that have come out. There's not been one Bill Emerson Act kind of at fault decision. So you are technically protected, but a lot of our organizations, our hotel chains, our venues, want to exceed sort of any threshold. And so knowing that you are protected, number one, citing things about that, especially in the beginning where it's a sealed kind of thing, citing the need from food banks. I don't see that going away anytime soon.
No, I don't either.
Citing the kind of very low risk CDC's own data seems to be person-to-person sort of sustained contact rather than a box that's been sitting behind,
right,
back of house, likely in a refrigerated environment, and also sort of what we talked about earlier, which is converting those food and beverage or any of those penalty pieces, convert that to good if you can.
Okay, that's a great idea. I like that. So managing your food and beverage minimum and taking what you didn't serve and donating it, for sure.
Yeah, buying canned food, buying protein.
Yeah, there's a couple of stories that I saw right when this hit that they were canceling their events and they were going to be charged only the food and beverage minimum to cancel. And the planner was like, okay, fine. And then a light bulb went off and she's like, you know what? Nope. I want you to make that food and I want you to go donate it. And, so that they were giving back to the community that they weren't actually coming to. And I love that concept. And how can we continue to do that with our events if necessary? And it will be hard, I think, too, with our properties, that are still furloughed, and having the staff to make that food. But if we can make that work, I think that model is a good one when we're still canceling meetings. So, unfortunately.
I agree. And I'm curious to have this conversation 6 months, 9 months from now,
okay.
where we presumably have a little more data too, and see how some of this shakes out.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Okay, cool. Well, thanks everybody for listening. And Eric, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it and all the work that you all do. Meetgreen.com. And this is the Thrive Meetings and Events and Eating in a Meeting podcast. And we will see you next week. And we're going to talk about independence and accessing different spaces for people who have different disabilities, and how do you access those spaces even in a COVID world. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome.
Everyone.